May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So no, your eyes do not deceive you. I am not Susan Russell. She's actually at home today battling a pernicious bug, and so keep her in your prayers, but I'm going to be the pinch hitter today, and so here we are. In today's gospel, we heard the second of two stories from Mark's gospel about Jesus miraculously multiplying loaves and fishes. What I love about this story is that it highlights for me the wonders that God can do with the smallest things. I think this is what Jan Richardson is trying to communicate in her poignant Ash Wednesday blessing, where she makes the case that the imposition of ashes on our foreheads at the beginning of Lent is meant to testify to what God can do within the dust, within the dirt, within the stuff of which the world is made, and the stars that blaze in our bones, and the galaxies that spiral inside the smudge that we bear. Stories like the loaves and the fishes are meant to remind us of the timeless truth that God can take whatever we have to give, no matter how small, no matter how feeble or insignificant we feel our efforts may be, and multiply the impact 1,000-fold. It is truly mind-blowing what God can do with the smallest things. Take the tiny mustard seed, for instance. It holds the potential of a 30-foot bush. I bet you didn't expect Bill Nye the Science Guy this morning, but that is an amazing fact. And I think it's probably why Jesus uses the example of the tiny mustard seed as his example when making the point that even a seemingly inconsequential speck of faith can move mountains. Meditating on the themes in today's readings, I was reminded of these words that Gandalf speaks in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. The wise wizard is inspired by the courageous example of Bilbo Baggins, who Tolkien describes as a little halfling from the Shire, a simple hobbit of the quiet countryside. Gandalf is so moved by the bravery of this tiny but tenacious little hobbit that he is moved to say, "I have found it is the small things, everyday deeds of ordinary folk, that keeps the darkness at bay. Simple acts of kindness and love." In today's gospel, we hear about a massive crowd that had come from far and wide to hear Jesus teach and preach and heal the sick in Bethsaida, this ancient fishing village on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. As biblical scholars note, nearly every vital event in the history of the people of Israel, from the book of Genesis to the time of Christ, occurred near a source of water. It's no accident that Jesus spent much of his ministry teaching around the Sea of Galilee, because it gave him many opportunities to demonstrate that he was the Word made flesh, who existed in the beginning with God. According to John's Gospel, God created everything through the Word, and nothing was created except through the Word. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and the Word's life brought light to everyone. The passage concludes, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it." Jesus is the physical embodiment of God's boundless love for human beings, and he was willing to enter this world where he experienced injustice, marginalization, oppression, and discrimination as a brown-skinned Palestinian Jewish refugee. Jesus suffered in every way that we do while he was here in this world, but then, even after suffering death on the cross, his compassion, his love for humanity, his life force could not be snuffed out. As Nicholas Walterstorff, who taught philosophical theology at Yale, writes, "God is light. God's love is the light that shines onto and into us and through us to the neighbor, sustaining us and making us flourish as does the sun. Jesus made the light of God's inexhaustible love visible when he appeared on the scene over 2,000 years ago. And that brilliant light could never be extinguished, not by the legions of Rome, the powerful religious leaders who opposed him, the forces of darkness, or the forces of nature, such as violent winds or raging waters. Let's pause for a moment to reflect on the fascinating symbolism of water in the scriptures and the significance of Jesus spending most of the 3 years of his ministry teaching along the shore of the Sea of Galilee. In the Old Testament, large bodies of water were symbols of chaos and death. They were seen as being associated with the abyss. In the story of creation in Genesis chapter 1, we see the Spirit of God hovering over the chaotic, formless, and void waters before God imposes order on the chaos. In Mark 4, just a few chapters before today's gospel reading, Jesus is fast asleep in the boat as he and his disciples are crossing the Sea of Galilee, when suddenly a furious storm arises. It's likely that Jesus was exhausted by a long day of teaching and healing, and he was probably worn out. Shaking with fear, the disciples wake their resting rabbi, who clearly had no fear of the great storm that was threatening to swamp the boat and drown him and his followers. But despite being utterly exhausted and perhaps a little peeved that his disciples still did not fully believe in him or trust that they were safe with him, Jesus' compassion prompts him to act. And he takes this opportunity to reveal himself and his power to his followers. This is the moment we have witnessed in countless comic book movies over the years, when the superhero takes off the mask or puts on the costume and everyone is astonished. It reminds me of that scene from The Lord of the Rings where Gandalf stands in front of Balrog, this ancient demon from the deep, and exclaims with fearsome authority, "You shall not pass!" But instead, the words Jesus uses, according to the Gospels, are peace, be still. Talk about quiet confidence. Talk about true authority. He knows who he is, and he knows whose he is. And he doesn't even need to raise his voice to have the winds and the waves obey him. The disciples were terrified, though, causing Jesus to ask them, "Why were you so fearful? Don't you even yet have confidence in me?" Not only did Jesus have mastery over Mother Nature, but he could stand confidently in front of the forces of chaos, death, and the abyss, represented by the raging waters, and essentially say, "You will not harm me or the people I love. No, you shall not pass." Even though they were filled with awe at the realization that their rabbi has superpowers, still the disciples were slow on the uptake, and they said among themselves, "Who is this man that even the winds and seas obey him?" Then we see a couple chapters later in Mark chapter 6, Jesus has gone up into the hills alone to pray, after being moved with compassion to miraculously feed 5,000 hungry people by multiplying 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Side note, I had actually forgotten that Jesus basically pulls off the same miracle twice because his thick-headed followers were so slow of heart to believe all that the prophets had spoken concerning the coming of the Messiah. All I know is that these little human details about the disciples make them so much more relatable to me. And I feel like I'm in good company since I, too, am a follower of Christ who, on my best day, often struggles with doubt and unbelief. But I digress. Let's get back to the story. So his disciples have gone ahead of him in their boat across the Sea of Galilee to Bethsaida. At about 3 a.m, he walks out to them on the water. He started past them, but when they saw something walking along beside them, they screamed in terror, thinking it was a ghost. But as we have already seen, Jesus' heart is a heart of compassion. And so he speaks to them at once. "It's all right," he said. "It is I. Don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat, and the wind stopped. The disciples just sit there dumbstruck, unable to take it in, for they still didn't realize who he was, even after having witnessed the miracles of Jesus calming the storm or feeding the 5,000. Fast forward to when they have reached Bethsaida safe and sound in Mark chapter 8, which we heard today. It's day 3 of the 3-day conference, and the food has run out. Because unlike church conferences today, meals were not included. So Jesus has a hungry crowd on his hands, and he calls his disciples together and he says, "This crowd is breaking my heart. They have stuck with me for 3 days, and now they have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they'll faint along the way because some of them have come a long distance." Jesus then takes 7 loaves of bread and the few fish the disciples had, and after giving thanks and pronouncing a blessing, he tells his followers to distribute the food to all who are present. After the crowd of 4,000 had eaten their fill, 7 sacks of leftovers were collected. Then he sent them all home. And as is his fashion, he gets into a boat to go back across to the other side of the lake. Now somehow, even though there were 7 basketfuls of leftovers, the disciples had forgotten to bring hardly any leftover bread, and there was 0 fish for the journey. All they had was 1 loaf, and they were in the boat discussing the lack of loaves, prompting Jesus to say to them, "Why are you still discussing having no loaves? Do you still not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes and fail to see? Do you have ears and fail to hear? And do you not remember? You saw me feed the 5,000 and the 4,000. Do you still not yet understand?" The disciples are focused on the fact that they have only 1 loaf of bread, and they're worried that there might not be enough to go around, even after all the miracles they've witnessed Jesus perform. The text doesn't say this, but I picture Jesus doing a facepalm and probably wanting to shake them and say, "Have you not been paying attention? Look, I love you, and I'm going to take care of you. With me, there will always be enough, okay? So don't worry, O ye of little faith. I am the Word who was with God in the beginning in the days of creation." With the same patience, compassion, and love that he showed to his disciples, I believe that Jesus is here with us this morning to remind us that with him there will always be enough. In her book, Breath is Prayer, a book that I often share reflections from with my patients at City of Hope, Jennifer Tucker says that God's help may not come in ways we expect, and it might not be in the form of complete physical healing or total relief from suffering, but God's help will come. She goes on to say that it may come through the compassion and care of people in your life. It may come through medications or therapy, or it may come as an indescribable inner peace, the kind of peace that only God can give. Even though our faith may be as small as the tiniest mustard seed, and our courage may falter when facing the storms of life, the one who sent Jesus and who sends us into this world still can say, "Let there be light," and there is light. Or "Let there be bread," and there is bread. Nothing is impossible with God. We may sometimes see ourselves as a tiny speck of dust in a giant universe, but Jesus came to show us what God can do with small things, what God can do with scared humans. Even those of us like me who might see ourselves as powerless as tiny little hobbits, like Bilbo Baggins, in the face of the forces of evil, injustice, and oppression in our day. The scriptures tell us that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so I believe that God still delights in using small things to accomplish big plans. As the Apostle Paul puts it in his first letter to the Corinthians, isn't it obvious that God deliberately chose men and women that the culture overlooks and exploits and abuses, chose these nobodies to expose the hollow pretensions of the somebodies? As a hospital chaplain, I have been asked to pray for the sick and those on the verge of death, but I have never witnessed a miracle like the ones recounted in the Gospel of Mark. But I have seen how the ripples of the small acts that we do with great love are miraculously multiplied by God's Spirit and ripple outward from us in ever-expanding circles, spreading the inexhaustible light of God's love to our neighbors, both far and wide. The Dutch priest Henri Nouwen, a spiritual thinker and writer who wrote endlessly about the life of Jesus and the love of God, observed that the world likes things to be large. The world likes things to be big, impressive, and elaborate. But he said, God chooses the small things which are overlooked in the big world. And then he had this to say about the miracle in today's gospel. Here's what he said. Jesus distributed the loaves and the fish as much as they wanted. There is enough, plenty for everyone. There are even many leftovers. Here, a great mystery becomes visible. What little we give away multiplies. This is the way of God. This is also the way we are called to live our lives. The little love we have, the little knowledge we have, the little advice we have, the little possessions we have, are given to us as gifts of God to be given away. The more we give them away, the more we discover how much there is to give away. May we take Henri's words to heart as we seek to make the light of God's inexhaustible love visible throughout this Lenten season by doing small things with great love. Amen.